Fingers cramped and sore, buttons just out of my reach. The shot slips away. Here is how I made my own camera grip. I'm a man of many missing talents, and one of them happens to be photography. If you've seen my previous video on making a tiny Japanese vending machine, you would know that earlier this year I went to Japan and picked up photography as a hobby in order to become a more well-rounded artistic person. And also, to be quite frank, I was just dog at it and I wanted to improve. With that said, I like to think that over the course of the past year, I've made some decent improvements to my shooting skills by employing some advanced techniques, such as buying a new camera and ensuring that I'm not having a seizure every time before I'm about to take a shot. Okay, so now that I've finished flexing my ability to hold something still and press a button, let's get to the second amazing skill that I've demonstrated through my work, and that's having the ability to buy a camera. That's right, pay to win, baby. If you ever decide to dive into the photography world on YouTube, you will quickly find that it's a loving community where a bunch of influencers try to shove expensive gear up your aspiring dreams to create art. The current meta for casual shooting is a camera made by Fujifilm called the Fujifilm X100VI. People love this camera because it's small, cute, and looks retro, just like Turbo Granny. It also has a feature called film simulations, which is basically like taking Instagram filters and putting them into the camera, so you can feel like a true film hipster without all of the development work. With that said, this camera is impossible to buy at Maserp right now, which is already really expensive. On top of that, the secondhand market for this camera has prices higher than Mount Fuji right now, so there's basically no good way to get this camera unless you want to wait on a wait list for months. And even then, by the time you actually get access to the camera, the 7th version is probably already out. Even with all the hype, I was pretty interested in this camera, especially as I got further and further into the hobby, but I didn't have the patience nor the money to buy the X100VI. So I decided to go with something similar but much cheaper, the XE4. The XE4 is kind of like Hell's Paradise. It's really good, but it's not necessarily mainstream. One of the cool things about it is, unlike the X100VI, it has interchangeable lenses, so you can turn your camera into a mech laser cannon. I found a pretty decent deal for a used XE4 from Japan, and I've been using it ever since. And I really like the camera, and it also happens to have the same film simulation feature that the X100VI has. I actually shot the 2 photos in the intro on this exact camera. While I've had a blast shooting with this thing, there is one major problem with this model, and it's that the ergonomics are rectangle. Unlike the X100VI and many other cameras, this camera has no grip, so it kind of feels like you're holding SpongeBob, but if he was oiled up and wearing leather pants. I would love to say that this isn't a big deal, but it kind of is. I always have to hold this thing in really awkward positions, and sometimes my hand cramps up and then I end up missing the shot entirely. I did some research about this model online, and this was one of the #1 complaints about this camera. It was a big reason it probably didn't pick up that much steam. When it came to researching solutions, the camera community did what it does best: tell you to spend more money. Many owners of the XE4 suggested buying an L-shaped grip for the camera to make it a lot more ergonomic and less prone to drops. However, when I went on Amazon, these things are $40 for an L. This was absolutely insane to me, considering that this thing is literally an L. It's not some beautifully shaped, handcrafted camera cage or something like that, and yet they still decide to charge the price of 5 Starbucks coffees for it. 5 is actually not a lot of coffees. At this point, you probably know where I'm going with this, but basically, my cheap ass decided I'm not paying $40 for this thing. I'm gonna make this for way cheaper to save my sore Asian hands and my wallet. The design phase of this project was pretty simple because I decided to maximize my creativity by copying everything and not changing anything. I liked how the original grip was very minimal and didn't add too much bulk to the overall profile of the camera. So I figured, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Let's make it worse. I booted up Fusion 360 and started creating a base for the camera to sit in. The original design makes the camera sit on top of the base without any kind of walls to actually secure it. And I was a little worried about the camera shifting around and coming out of alignment with the base, so I decided to design this in a way where the frame had kind of a lip that the camera could sit inside. And that way, no shimmying could happen. At the bottom of the assembly, I added a hole that I could put a tripod thumb screw through to actually secure the thing in place. The sizing of this part would be really important, so I decided to 3D print a prototype of this part to actually make sure everything fits first. As you can see here, I totally botched the bottom part of this print because I forgot to print supports with this design. So what ended up happening was I just got this really gross looking bowl of ramen noodles at the bottom of my piece. But it's fine because this is just a test fit and we're just making sure things actually fit okay. It just made me feel really dumb. The test print ended up fitting pretty perfectly. It was slightly loose, but I actually wanted that because I felt like if I went any tighter, it would start to damage the actual metal at the bottom of the camera. So this was fine with me. From there, I went back into Fusion 360 to finish up the rest of the design. Now that the base was Bing chilling and the measurements were all good, there was only one thing left to do, and that was designing the part that actually matters, the grip. I basically extruded a rectangle along the side just to create the L, and I also shaved down the edges so that people other than Minecraft Steve would find this actually comfortable. From there, I sent this thing back to the 3D printer, and this time I did not forget to print supports and created this prototype. I secured this thing to my camera, and voila, we had the first prototype. The fit was pretty decent, and I was relatively satisfied with how this actually looked in comparison to the original. I don't think we were that far off, but my printer's resolution is not very good, so the layer lines were huge, and in addition to that, the print quality just looked really bad. There was a lot of bumpiness along the edges. But no fear, the sponsor of our video, pcbway, is here. pcbway is your one-stop shop for anything PCB manufacturing and assembly. On this channel, we've used a ton of their services to bring all sorts of deranged ideas from my brain into the real world. For this project, we'll be using their 3D printing services in order to create a much higher quality part than my home 3D printer can. The whole process is super simple. All I had to do was go on their website, upload the 3D STL file, pick my material, pick my color, and I pretty much just let pcbway handle all of the rest. The really awesome part about their 3D printing service is that they basically handle all of the engineering needed to actually print your part as well. This means you don't have to worry about setting up print supports, the orientation, making sure that it's printed the right way. These are all things that their engineers will kind of review and make sure are most optimal for whatever part you're trying to manufacture. Within a few weeks, Santa came early and left this at my doorstep. Their packaging is top-notch, and as you can see here, they really put in a lot of effort to ensure that your plastic babies are not harmed during transit. Opening the package up, you can see that our part is all printed and ready to go. I'm always super impressed with their print quality every time I receive my parts from them. There's basically no layer lines visible, the colors are super deep, and it doesn't even look like it actually came from a 3D printer. If you're interested in using pcbway for your next project, click the link in the description to learn more. I've been playing with this grip for a while now, and it's actually made a pretty big difference in how I handle this camera. I don't have to do any more awkward hand gymnastics to get in position like I used to, and even though the grip is quite narrow, it feels really comfortable to me, probably because my hands are on the smaller side. I'm also now able to take vertical shots a lot more comfortably by just letting the grip hang off my fingers. This is something that I struggled a lot with before this grip because it would just keep slipping through. In addition, I found that since the bottom of the camera is now protected by the grip, I'm a lot more casual about putting my camera on various surfaces, and I don't really need to worry about scratching it too much. I also know that if I do mess up the grip or scratch it on some weird surfaces, I could just print a new one. Another thing I really like about using 3D printed materials for this is that it's incredibly light. The original version of this grip on Amazon is made out of aluminum, which is pretty light in the metal world, but it doesn't get quite as light as plastic with low infill. Usually for actual products, I like metal because it looks better, but in this case, for something like a grip where it's mainly functional, I don't really care as long as it blends in with the look of the camera, which in this case, I definitely think we accomplished that. With that said, not all is rosy with this design, or any of my designs for that matter. One thing I severely screwed up was the design of the bottom plate. First of all, attaching the camera to the bottom plate is incredibly awkward because the thumb screw that I chose doesn't have a coin slot to make turning it in really easy. This means that once you actually get the grip on and secure, it's pretty annoying to take off. In retrospect, I should have used a thumb screw that was a bit more narrow and also had something like a coin slot to make it a lot easier to detach from the camera for cleaning. That brings me to the next problem with the base plate, which is that since it's completely solid, there's no way to access the battery or SD card at all. Now, personally, this isn't really a problem for me since I usually use super large SD cards that I barely ever fill up anyways, and I also don't use external batteries that often. However, I'm still kind of mad that I forgot this because it's such a simple modification to make in the design. Having these cutouts at the bottom would have also saved material and also made the grip even lighter than it already is. This is definitely something that will be happening in the V2 when I get to that. The last downside of my design is that it doesn't allow you to mount the camera to a tripod. This is probably not a huge deal for most owners of this camera because this camera is more of a street photography camera where you walk around and take photos of things. It's not really like those dedicated photo shoot professional cameras that you might see wedding photographers have, for example. However, this is another one of those things where it's just a really easy add, and I'll probably do it in the next version. Overall, despite the shortcomings I mentioned, I would still largely declare this project a success. It fulfills my needs and ultimately prevented me from having to spend $40 on a glorified aluminum version of this. As I mentioned before, I definitely think there's a bunch of improvements that I can make to the design, but if you want to 3D print this thing as is right now, you can go to the description below and access the file for free on Thingiverse. If you happen to have this camera, this is a super simple print, so I'd recommend just printing it and trying it out. And if you have the creativity for it, I challenge you to go and make the improvements that I talked about in this video by remixing the file. I also think the camera space in general is a very cool area for makers to shine. There's a lot of grips, mounts, and things like that where makers can use CAD and electronics for a bunch of different use cases. Let's just say I have some more ideas for projects in the photography/camera space in the future, and you can look forward to or dread that, whichever is more convenient for you. Shout out again to pcbway for sponsoring this video. They've been an amazing partner in helping me bring a lot of my ideas to the real world, and definitely give them a look if you need some PCB, CNC, or 3D printing related services. Thanks for watching this video, and if you want to see more cool projects like this one, subscribe and join the fruit basket. Keep shooting. Photos. Pair out.